it was just the collective power of all of these different people stepping out of their comfort zones and taking care of each other where, our governments were just utterly unable to. And so it made me really hopeful that we're builders. We're able to come up with these new institutions. We are that generation. We're a generation that it's our role to rethink and redesign the type of political systems and institutions that we have. And it's our place in history, and no one's going to do it if we're not up to it.
I'm Ranjor, and this is Remake, a podcast about design, systems, and society. In each episode, I talk to someone who's trying to change our lives for the better in some meaningful way, whether through a new product, new venture, or a new way of looking at the world. And I try to understand how they came to it, what makes them tick, and what we can learn from them.
Pia Mancini is the co-founder and CEO at Open Collective, a chair of the DemocracyOS Foundation, and a democracy activist who helped create the DemocracyOS platform and launched the Net Party in Argentina. Her TED Talk about upgrading democracy for the internet era has exceeded 1 million views and helped reshape the conversation around the meeting place of democracy and the internet. She is a Y Combinator alum, a young global leader at the World Economic Forum, and she's also Roma's mom. In this conversation, we talk about her journey from empowering citizens in the political process to empowering collectives to self-fund and self-govern. Her vision for a more inclusive and expansive digital democracy, and the tension between idealism and the realities of life, politics, and systems. There is no more important discussion, I believe, than how our new technologies should be used and woven into the fabric of our public life, and how to move from chaotic, even destructive populism to a constructive model of participation and empowerment. My conversation with Pia is one of the most fascinating conversations in an ongoing series of design conversations we've lined up for you on design for democracy, social change, and positive impact. So please hit subscribe if you're interested in these topics. And now let's jump right in with Pia Mancini. All right. I'm sitting here across the screen from Pia Mancini. Pia, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
And so these days, we usually have to contend with the crazy last year and a half of COVID. So I'd love to hear where you spent most of this time. What was your experience and how did it affect what you're doing?
So I spent half of the initial lockdown in Argentina. That's where I was born. And I was randomly there for a wedding when the world closed. So I got stuck there for a couple of months until I was able to get a humanitarian flight back to Spain with my husband and my daughter, which was quite the experience. We were lucky we were able to fly out of Argentina at some point. And then I spent the rest of the time here in Spain, which is where I live now. It's not a bad place to be locked in, I have to be honest. So yeah, we were, I guess, all quite comfortable given the situation that we were living. I've been running a remote company for 5 years. And so it felt like the world finally catch up to our way of living in a way, which is working from home and being remote and working from anywhere you want to be and like a lot of time on Zoom. So it wasn't such a huge change for us in terms of like our work flow, our work day, and not for our team. Open Collective, most of the team are parents. And so it was quite disruptive in the sense that we all had our kids with us, like jumping up and down in an apartment somewhere in the world. And that was quite challenging. And I guess like everyone else, it was challenging for us. Even if we're remote, we still do sprints every quarter or team retreats, and we weren't able to meet. We still haven't been able to get the team together again. And that like obviously had like some impact, I guess.
On the other hand, the need for something like Open Collective probably went up, right?
Yeah, so that's the other kind of the flip side, and I always feel terrible saying this, but 2020 was like a great year for Open Collective. We grew a lot. We went from losing money to making money for a change, and we are now sustainable one of our foundations, one of our non-for-profits grew 20x, and they moved from managing $300,000 budget to $6 million budget in a year. And that was fun. So we were very busy during the pandemic. Beyond the financial kind of aspect of it, like the impact aspect of it was huge, right? We actually went to zero fees for 3 months at the beginning of the pandemic. We stopped all our revenue because we felt like we needed to give something to the world. Like it was like these are 2 cents that we have and we're putting them here, right? So we went to like completely zero fees, which we can go into this later, but completely change our business model for the better, which was very surprising. I'm happy to chat about that because it was quite a journey. But I guess one of the, beyond that, like really seeing all of these communities showing up for each other around the world really helped us, I don't know, wake up in the morning because we were suddenly supporting or enabling hundreds of groups around the world that are just putting money together to support each other, and neighborhoods coming together, and lab fridges being created everywhere. We've supported everything really. And from encampment materials for people who were like forced out of their houses to folks paying, for food and delivering food for people who couldn't get out of the house, to love pantries and chefs like opening up their kitchens to cook meals. So it was just, I don't know, in the middle of all the nastiness and craziness of the pandemic, there was like something there that made us really human. And it was, beautiful to see to us.
Yeah, that seems to be one of the upsides of this terrible thing is people reached out, even when, not in any sort of organizational way, just reach out to their friends or their families, just made sure. And I had situations where I had to rely on my neighbors and so it reminded us that we're humans and that we can.
Yeah, it's funny how we remember we're humans in the worst of situations, right? Instead of remember we're humans in the best of them. But it's funny how we are wired like that. Unfortunately, it's part of our survival kit. We need to be there for one another when crisis hits.
I guess, or where everything is going according to plan, then the plan becomes the thing. And when it's not going according to plan, we look around and we see each other.
Yeah. There's a really beautiful book that I read recently, and it was one of the best things I've read in, ages. It's called Humankind, A Hopeful History of Humanity by Rutger Bregman. Anyway, he's Dutch author, and he revisits how we think of humanity from a really hopeful lens, instead of thinking that we are evil by nature, that we are just this Hobbesian beast that needs tyrant to, behave. History shows that we are not that we show up for each other. We are actually pretty decent, most of us.
As individuals, as individuals.
We're pretty good people, and we're wired like that. Yeah, I really recommend that book. I think it was one of the most inspiring things I've read, but not only because that it's a hopeful history of humanity, but also because I think that we've been looking at design and institutions and systems in the wrong way. We are optimizing for making sure that the worst angels don't ruin things, or we're optimizing for selfishness, and instead of optimizing for goodness and kindness, which at the end of the day it would have made us kinder, right?
No, it's really interesting because both seem to be true. It's true that the vast majority of people are good and well-intentioned. It's also true that, let's say, around 10% of us are psychopaths or narcissists who would abuse whatever system. If it can be abused, they'll abuse it. And how do you build a system that uses the good in us while not letting the bad actors, who are few, run the show?
I think we've optimized for the bad actors, and the result of that is that we have more bad actors because of that, right? Because we put at the end of the day, the system is designed for those sociopaths or narcissistic characters to win, because it's a winner-take-all kind of system, right? And so what we are we are as much the designers of our institutional system as the product of our institutional system.
Interesting. Yeah, that's definitely true. By the way, your book reminds me of another book that I read that actually is where I encountered liquid democracy for the first time. It's called Future Perfect. Have you ever? And that's also, it's a very rosy picture of where we could go, and with all of these solutions to problems. There's problems, but there's also solutions. So usually when we start the conversation, there's so much super interesting topics to dive into, but I find that it's more interesting to connect with the person who's going through this journey a little bit. And I came up with this question that seems to work nicely to open things up. And so I'm going to ask you, what's something that you've learned early in life, maybe in childhood, that is still with you, that still drives you today and still guides your actions?
That's a very good question. Early, as in very early, as in
as early as you want to go. Yeah.
So I don't know. I guess one of my earlier lessons in life, or something that I remember learning, like when I was, I don't know, my early 20s or just not even then, is that it doesn't, I guess it's related, maybe I'm thinking about this because it's related to what we're discussing before, but I think it doesn't matter who the person that goes into a system, it doesn't matter who they are or how they behave, the system will overtake, and the system person will, exactly. And that's because I was working in politics and I was helping friends of mine go into politics, and and I was seeing what happened afterwards. And so I've been in politics and activism since I was very young, 17 or something. So I was quite involved, and so I was always obsessed, and I still am, with a systemic approach or a systemic view of change, and not just individual view of change. And I worked a lot in preparing leaders for democracy and leadership school and things like that. And I was super involved in that for a while. And that's, where I learned that it doesn't really matter, because it's not about that. It's about the system that we create and the pieces that we put together. So I ended up working on that. And my thesis at university was institutions matter. Institutions do matter a lot. And by focusing on that kind of super individualistic trip of it's about how you affect change, we're completely forgetting about what matters. And I think that, I guess this is useful to the system itself, right? I'm just going into the weeds here, sorry.
So this system encourages you to obsess with the personalities and not with the system.
Because it's in the system's interest, because they want to self-perpetuate, right? So it made all sense, and we're all suckers for that, for the individual. And I was the first one. That when I was 16 or something, and I was already going into political science. And why would you start working in politics? My answer was because I have a responsibility. It's my responsibility, right, to do this, because. And I still feel that, but I feel it from not from an individualistic kind of perspective of it's my role to go in there and affect change, but I feel it as how can I create an environment how can I design new systems? How can I think about alternatives, rather than this ego trip of
if I am the prime minister, everything is going to work out.
It's going to be perfect, and I'm going to be just in the Ardens. That's not going to happen.
It's interesting. I think it does have its limits. So in terms of the system, so I totally agree about incentives. And you could take the perfect person, you put them in a system where they get punished every time they do the right thing, and they get rewarded every time they do something else. And they want to have a good life too. It's not reasonable to expect them to act against their own fundamental basic interests, like the ability to eat, right? The ability to...
And it's not even about corruption. It's deeper than that. It's about what you need to do in order to be in the game.
Exactly.
It's very fundamental.
Exactly. I think sometimes when I look at politics, there's fundamentally 3 ways of motivating people, belief, ideas, ideology, money, and like straight up, like I'm paying you to do something. And then there's corruption, which is it's the third way of making a system work. Like you can't, and if you want to accomplish something that doesn't, where there's no budget for it and there's no ideology to get people to do it, to volunteer for it, corruption is the only other alternative that our system offers, and which is why it's so rampant. It's just people trying to get things done and trying to marshal people to this effort, and that's the only way to do it. So it's really interesting. And the systemic approach is that we recently talked to David Peter Straw, who wrote System Thinking for Social Innovation. And he says one of his famous phrases, I don't know if he came up with it or he's just citing it, but the system is perfectly designed to do what it's doing now.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And that is true of the internet as well. And it's true of social media. And it's true of all systems, because it's a fundamental property of systems that they want to stay alive.
Yep.
Right? They want to self-perpetuate. And we're just the ones who miss it. And with social media, like my going back to my personal so that you were asking before, I come from, or my interest in, not my interest, but my kind of the core of my activism started in 2011, right? 2012, around that time of the Arab Spring, and then Movimiento 15M, the student movement in Chile, in Argentina, just like all the global pro-democracy movements of 2010 onwards, right? Like just Occupy and after Occupy. It was in large part fueled by social media. We were using Twitter, and the governments were like freaking out because they didn't even understand. And I remember, I think it was Turkey, that at one point they were like, okay, we're shutting down internet because we can't have this happening. Or they weren't sophisticated enough. And then they became so sophisticated that they're now winning the game, obviously, because that's how it works. And at the time, we completely missed that the system was designed to viralize content because the business model is what it is. And now this is obvious and we all know it. But at the time, we thought this was this tool to generate healthy public debate, to organize, to get people talking about this, to support each other, to learn what was going on. We were, building software in Argentina, DemocracyOS, and it was suddenly used in Tunisia to debate the constitution, and we didn't even know what was going on, or who the Tunisian folks were, or how could we help. And this felt so momentous and amazing and spring-like. But we missed that the system wasn't designed for this. The system wasn't designed for healthy public debate. It wasn't designed for organizing thought-out alternatives to the institutions. It was designed to viralize content. And at the time, the content that spread we were lucky. It was the one we wanted, or the one that helped. But then when that changed, we were like, oh, wow, what's going on, right?
There's this engine that's trying to create engagement, right, at the core of Facebook. And then you think, what's the most engaging thing that could possibly happen? And it's always revolution or civil war, right? That's super engaging. You can't stop looking at posts that are about your own country falling apart. And so that's what it did. We ended up building an engine for civil war, I think.
Yeah.
And I actually think the reason why Arab Spring and it happened in those places is those were the more fragile places. So there was actually less of a vector to get people from where they were to like wanting to change things dramatically. And in the West, it just took, or in some other countries, it just took an extra decade to build the fake outrage to the point where they actually wanted to tear down the system. It's fascinating and it's really sad. So going back to your story, so you started by studying political science.
Yes.
What made you choose that? And
yes, at the time I felt, as I was saying, that it was my responsibility. I felt very lucky because my family could support me through university, could support me through working for free. I did a lot of student, I can't think of the word now, but anyway.
Exchange students.
Yeah, things like that. And I also, worked at places without getting paid just to learn because my parents were able to support me through that. And so I felt like, and I was always interested in politics. My family is I'm Argentinian, so it runs in the blood. Argentinians are quite opinionated and political.
Yeah.
And my household was particularly political. My dad is quite conservative, so it was like an easy target to fight against. It wasn't too challenging for me. And then my mother was like on the other aspect as well, on the other kind of end of the spectrum. And I remember you used to fight in the mornings for who gets to read the paper first before going to school or things like that.
I would think they would have different papers with the politics.
No, so there was only one paper for it. And so, yeah, I guess there are like a lot of discussions at home. And I started, I don't know, I had a group of friends who were also interested in politics. And so we were always encouraged to chat about it and discuss. My dinner at home was
interesting.
Argumentative.
Interesting. Yeah, I have. I'm half Argentinian, I should say. So my father is Argentinian, and so I know that from him. He was definitely very involved in politics. But my parents agree. So I guess there wasn't a lot of political arguments in the house.
Conflict. Yeah.
Yeah, there was arguments about other things. But so from that kind of background of studying politics and political science, when do you get involved in? You said that the Arab Spring, but when do you start getting involved with upgrading democracy, this whole movement with the internet is going to change things?
So I had worked in politics for many years before that, and I did everything from think tank work to campaign manager. That's one of the things I love the most in the world is to campaign manage. It's a good fit for my kind of personality. It's very hard work for a limited time, but then you die and then it's over. It's great.
Actually, I think you're not supposed to die. I think you're supposed to actually.
End of the process.
It's supposed to actually turn into something else. Okay.
And so and I was working in government in political affairs at the city. I was also, helping a friend of mine become mayor of quite a large city in Buenos Aires. And I don't know if there's like one point in time where this came very clear, but I remember it was like maybe 2010 and it was winter and we were campaigning and one of the organizers, the local organizers, took us to this like barn in the middle of Pilar outside of Buenos Aires. And it was like stuck with construction materials and mattresses and things like that. They were going to be used to pay for house or make housing for folks in need in the area. And I'm like, great, this is great. Can we help? I was working for a candidate, right? So I was trying to help and be proactive and get good photo ops and things like that. So I'm like, great, can we do that? When is this happening? We want to come and help and support and be here. And he's like, no, but it's next year. And I'm like, what do you mean? It's the middle of July, it's freezing. It's like, but elections are next year. And I'm like, wait, are we waiting for a year with all of this here just to build things during election? Like we're going to give them out during election time. I was like so obvious. I was like, how do you don't do that? You're like working for a candidate. What do you mean? This is how, and that's where it felt so deflating and so frustrating. I'm like, what am I doing with all of this? Right? It's what it doesn't matter. It truly doesn't matter. It's the system. It's perverted like this. We are not important. My feeling was like, great, people don't matter during the times between elections. That's it.
Yeah.
And it felt so poor. It felt so, I don't know,
dysfunctional.
It's dysfunctional, but also so limited. Why are we forced to just wait for 2 years until we're able to do something? Some friends of mine at the time, like, were playing around with this idea of doing a party like the Pirate Party in Argentina and thinking about using technology for politics, and it felt like the right time. I left the campaign and then I started working to put the Net Party together and building the software, and that's when all the thinking around upgrading democracy started.
Cool. So tell me about that. I guess maybe before we dive into what your solution was, let's maybe sharpen what the problem was, right? So the problem was this disconnect between the representatives and the people, where they seem to only care about us electing them one more time, right? Is that
right? Yeah. So there is a big kind of disconnect between our ability. Like at the same time that I was seeing this, we were seeing all the people on the street using social media, right? So this happened at the same time in parallel, right? It wasn't. And so we were seeing all of these kind of newfound ability to connect, to communicate, to express, to organize, to participate. But then we were like shoved into a system that our only interaction was voting once every couple of years, if you're lucky. And I'm like, how can these two worlds coexist? This is bound to create a lot of mess in the system. And so I guess to formulate what we thought the problem was, or what I still believe the problem is that our society radically changed in the past 30 years, fueled by a new communication technology, and our political structures and other institutions, but let's focus on this, our political institutions or democracies have stayed the same. And they were designed for a different era, right? Like institutions are not created in a void. They respond to a certain society, a certain technology, a certain education, a certain means of communication, means of transport. Like we create what we can with what we have, essentially. And what we had at the time is very different to what we have today. And so it creates this situation where we are completely out of sync. And we started thinking, and the process is we started thinking about how can we upgrade democracy to the tools that we are using today, to the technology and capacity and ability that citizens have today. How can we use technology to bring democracies to the century the society is living in? I had a phrase in the TED Talk that I resonated a lot, that I said that we were 21st century citizens, that we are living under 19th century designed institutions that were designed for information technology of the 15th century. And that holds true today. Like today, we're still living under institutions that were designed in the 19th century and were optimized for ink and paper, right? Yeah. And so and that's what we have today. And so the consequence of that is like highly territorial political system that only cares about the territory, because it's the type of governance institutions that were designed for nation states, and nation states are obviously highly territorial, and the boundaries that were created are bound. You could have an empire or a nation all the way up to wherever your post could go. After that was it. It was unknown territory. If you cannot send a post, you couldn't send a levy taxes. And so that was the best possible system that could be designed with the tools that we had at the time for the society that we had at the time. It's a system where few make decisions in the name of the many. You cannot have a lot of interactions because you cannot have people going on horses for 3 days or 5 days in order to vote. You cannot fit a lot of people in the same room. Education was far from universal, so you needed a system that could listen to the ones who had better access or any. And yes, that was like a really good system for the society that we have. That the society changed. And we still have representatives that we vote that stay for 2 years or 5 years, depending on the system, and that we essentially outsource all our decision making. We tell them, yes, vote on everything, and then I'll come back and tell you if you did a good or a bad job. That, from a design perspective, that's so poor. That interaction is like amazingly poor, right? It's like sending an emoji and saying, yay, nay, that's it, boom.
Yeah. If you think about like the way that the world looked back then, because I think one of the most radical things that the internet did was very effortlessly connect everyone to everyone. And back in, I don't know, the 18th century, we weren't even talking to each other as much. We were each isolated in his own little town, in his own little household. And it would probably take 4 years for you to even form an opinion about how the government is doing, right? And now we can self-organize, educate each other, get educated about issues very quickly. And just 4 years seems like forever. It seems like 5% of our lives or something.
It's also ridiculous that we are still forced to be represented. Like our citizenship is constrained to the territory. That for me, it's like one of the things that I find most mind-blowing. Like, why am I represented by Argentina? God only knows, right? I haven't been living there. I wouldn't choose to be represented by Argentina. I was born there, so that's it. I'm stuck with it. And I feel I would maybe prefer other look, let's say climate talks,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Why am I stuck with Argentina? I don't know. Like, I would much rather give my agency to a network of scientists and activists and organizations. Or if I'm forced to choose a country, then I'm going to choose a country that has a much better track record in sustainability than Argentina. I'll give my power to Costa Rica. I don't know. But I am not allowed to do that. And it's insane, right?
Yeah.
So I think we've inherited this system and we've been struggling to upgrade it.
Yeah, that makes sense. So tell me about DemocracyOS. What kind of components it had? How did it work? And then how did that kind of connect with this idea of the net party?
So I guess they were both part of the same project. DemocracyOS, what we wanted to do was to create a space for citizen interaction in the ongoing decision-making of a political system, right? Well, we would like to have a say on legislation. And not just on whenever like some politician decides to open up a channel of discussion, or not even discussion, but the circus of asking the people what they want. We wanted to actually have a space where we could interact with our representatives on a regular basis and tell them how we would like them to vote. And also be able to surface social knowledge that it's not surfaced by government, right? Or by political institutions. For example, I don't know, you have a public health piece of legislation, right? Like the doctors that are working 25 hours a day in a public hospital have a wealth of knowledge, right? They're not politicians. They're not going to be a politician. They do not have the capacity lobby that they're not organized because they're doing their jobs. But they have phones. They have access to being able to participate. They have access to, so instead of forcing them to go to whatever government was calling, like when they have public assemblies that are awful. I don't know if you've ever been to one, but the public assemblies in Buenos Aires, they were like co-opted by political parties and it was like a screaming match. So no one wants to do it. And also, of course, they organize them on Tuesday at 11 o'clock in the morning where everyone else is working, right? And so, because that's what they do, right? And so we wanted to meet people where they were, essentially, and open spaces for citizen participation that they could actually use. And so DemocracyOS was a platform that we would feed whatever piece of legislation was on the docket for discussion in Congress. We would connect with network of experts, if you want, or folks knowledgeable on the subject that would help explain, because obviously this is another characteristic of the system, right? The system the language of the system is designed to exclude because no one understands a piece of legislation. I gave a talk once in Argentina where I read a piece of legislation and I asked for a show of hands to see who understands. And it's impossible. No one understands, of course, because again, the lawyers, the legalists, my husband always says that lawyers are the hackers of the old system, right? They were the ones who were trying to get the old system siloed.
It's the code.
It's the code. Exactly. They're like the gatekeepers, right? And so we would translate that piece of legislation. We would explain what on earth it was. And then we would invite folks to participate and then to vote. Right? It was a very the first kind of iteration of that was a very simple citizen engagement and voting tool. And then the next kind of level of complexity was adding the liquid democracy piece to it. That was us acknowledging that maybe you don't want to give your voting power to your representative, your local county representative for everything, and folks who you think would represent you better for certain topics. And so you would be able to give your voting power to different people for topics or things like that, right? Or you could keep it to yourself, or you could choose your politician if that's what you are. That's fine, but it's about not being forced into it. And so that was the second aspect.
So if we can unpack liquid democracy for a moment, because I think most people I talk to are still not aware of this idea, but I think it started with Lewis Carroll, and who's the mathematician who first described the mechanism. But the idea that if you don't know who to vote for, you can give your vote to someone that you at least knows better than you.
Yeah.
And if you have the vote on the economy, and you know that you don't understand finance and the economy and all these policies, but you have a blogger that you trust, or you have a friend who's more knowledgeable than you, then you give them your vote, right? And what this creates is this interim tier of it's power brokers, but they're not politicians. They're just professionals who have a lot of people who trust them, but they suddenly, because of that trust, have some power, have some say.
Yeah, and you kind of surface collective intelligence and you surface social leadership. So I guess one of the most interesting aspects of liquid democracy, it's not really direct democracy as a system, as a democratic system. I think it's a very blunt instrument. It's not sophisticated in the sense that forcing a population, a constituency to constantly vote on everything a la Greek direct democracy worked at the time, but it's not going to work today. And we can go into that, but I think that what's more interesting about liquid democracy is it's a more sophisticated type of representation, right? You don't need to vote always yourself. You can delegate your vote to someone else or to different people, and you can decide to override that vote. You can also decide to say, okay, I'm going to give you my vote on all of these, but when it comes to this aspect of health policy, I'm going to vote myself because this I'm actually, very interested in, or I know a lot about this, or I care a lot about this. So it's not a leaderless soup of people voting. It's a emerging and dynamic type of the representation. And I think the dynamism of it is what's, most interesting. And it's the type of feature, if you want, that the current system is unable to provide.
Yeah. And then this is very similar to the PageRank algorithm from Google, right? Where a page that has a lot of other pages linking to it, their link counts more, right? If everybody says, oh, this is the best page on digital democracy, and then when that page links to another page, that matters. That really matters.
And it gives you, it frees you from territorial constraints, because right now, for example, if even inside a country, a nation state, I was living in Buenos Aires, but the folks living in Pilar, in the outside of Buenos Aires, that go to the city of Buenos Aires, they work there, they spend there, they pay taxes there because they pay VAT and things like that, they can't vote. Why? Because they're on the other side of the road.
Right.
And I'm like, but why? If you are going to discuss transport policy in the city, don't you think that everyone who uses public transport in the city should actually be asked, is this a good thing or a bad thing, or should we do this or that? Yeah. Or you're going to be spending money on rebuilding the public transport hub. Ask folks if this is a good idea to do above ground or under. I don't know. It really provides a rich type of representation that is more representative, of how society actually is and operates and who we are.
Yeah, interesting. So before we'll go back into the reality and then we update with the latest project, if you can paint a picture of what's the dream, where could we, if we could really upgrade democracy with all of these ideas and tools, what could our life, our world look like?
Yeah, I guess it's a world. The world could be a place where having agency is not an accident of birth anymore. It's not an accident of where you're born, but having agency is a factor of you being a human on this planet. Right? We could have a world where we can all come together as commons who share one planet. And I see us having agency or operating and having voting on two very distinct levels. A global level, where we all have the same say and we are not relegating folks who happen to have been born in an authoritarian government, under an authoritarian government. We're not relegating them to being stuck under their government without any kind of say. I feel like we do have a responsibility to us as humans to ensure that everyone has a voice, everyone has an ability to choose. And so I see a world where we have agency at that level, and at the same time we have a very local community fabric, and we forget about nation states because they're useless anyway. And so your main space, the main kind of entity that will decide on regulate your life is your city, your local kind of environment, where we kind of participate and obviously have action, agency and be a collective there. And I think that the more we're going to go away, and we're already seeing this, but the more we're going to turn away from fossil fuels and we're going to increasingly go to distributed generation of energy, the more we're going to see the kind of nation state crumbling, and the more we're going to see the local level rising, and at the same time the global one, right? So I see that world. I see that we can have a world without borders. I think that we can have a world that doesn't require passports. We didn't always require a passport to move around the world, so those are imposed barriers. I see a world where we have universal basic income, right? That your proof of humanity grants you the right to share in the distribution of wealth that we generate. And that universal basic income ensures that you are able to choose. And I think that a lot of it's a mixed bag, the techno utopian or folks who are thinking about using technology to bring our systems to the current century. But I think there's a thread that you can pull that has to do with your ability to choose and to move and to freely decide what you want to do. And I think that universal basic income is very tied to that, because right now the social welfare system, the welfare state, it's very opinionated about how poor you have to be in order to give you assistance, or the type of work you need to do in order to receive assistance, or how hurt you need to be in order to justify that you need disability assistance. And that's appalling, and that generates an awful system. So I think we can imagine a world where everyone is guaranteed a minimum universal basic income. And so it doesn't matter how poor you are, right? It's about the fact that you're a human. I can't wait for that world to be.
Yeah, no, there's definitely some things that just feel like they're from another century, and like borders. Like I hate
Borders
that I
is
have
incredible.
to. Yeah, my company is me and freelancers from all over the world, and also our project. The project is in a different country every time, and I hate that I have to put an address.
Yeah.
On the company. And so just the idea of borders seems really old-fashioned. The fact that I go log into Netflix and I can't watch a certain show because I'm outside of a border. And then there's this idea of you vote and then you disappear, and then you come in a few years later, and where we self-organize so quickly and we solve problems so quickly together online. And then it just feels like it's our ability to self-organize is so much better than the governments now.
Yeah, for sure.
That it threatens, if they don't catch up and don't embrace it, it's going to overtake them. And then it is what it seems to be doing in some places.
And I think that the argument of the progressive argument for the institutional need, I think it goes back to what we were talking at the very beginning. It assumes that if we're going to be self-organizing, then we're going to leave a lot of people outside because we're inherently selfish, right? So the state needs to step in to make sure that we as individuals or we as a collective are not. One of the questions that I got asked the most when I was campaigning for the Net Party was, okay, but if everyone votes to kill all people with blue eyes, and I was like, when in the world did that actually happen? Like, why do you think that we are gonna all collectively decide to do this? And as if we as individuals have this inherent want to do bad to other people, right?
Yeah.
Like it was seriously, it was like, how are you gonna stop everyone from deciding to take?
Yeah, it does happen that people decide to kill other people or other groups inside of their country. I feel like
But it's not people, like it's not Of course, but it is the leadership, right? It is the people who are good at winning the game of being in charge.
Yeah, I'm not sure I agree with that. So if I look at racism, for instance, in the United States, I think the politicians are following the people. I think that there are a lot of racist people, and they demand that their politicians express that racism. And if they don't, they actually won't get elected in certain parts of the country.
I understand that, but let me push back on that, because that's a grim view of who we are as a society. And I understand that reading from what's happening, but the people who are electing representatives are super vocal and radicalized minority. And that is part of the problem, right? So if only a very small percentage of people vote, and that percentage of people overwhelm, and the states are small states are overrepresented, right? So then, of course, politicians need to act for their base, but the base is not what it used to be. It's not half of the electorate. It's like a small minority.
Yeah,
right?
the radicalized. Yeah,
they're radicalized, and they have voice, and they have channels. And again, going back, we missed this on social media. We gave them the tools.
Oh. So we talked about the dream, which is very compelling. I want to talk about the clash with reality when with the Partido de la Red and with the trying to start implementing this. What have you learned? Because there's the scene in Game of Thrones where I guess there's like I'm trying to remember the details, but there's like a soldier, a priest. It's like a story. It's a soldier, a priest, a king, and someone else, businessman or something. And they're all in a room, and who has the power? And the answer is the person that people think has the power. That's who has the power. And so there's this Game of Thrones, this kind of cynical game of power involved. And so tell me about where you come in with all this idealism and what happens.
Yeah, it was fun. So I guess we first had the idea, the DemocracyOS platform, and we had a lot of contacts in politics because most of us were more or less involved at one point or another. So we started reaching out, and it was very clear that no one was interested in using the platform. And so we said, all right, we'll create a political party and we'll just do it ourselves. Which sounded fun at the time. Then it was
that doesn't sound fun to me, but yeah, I guess.
Gosh, yes, I wouldn't do it again. But we built this 5-meter tall Trojan horse that looked like the horse in Troy, the movie, which was great. And we were parading it all around Buenos Aires, saying that the party was taking to Congress the voice of thousands of citizens that could not participate, right? So
it's a good metaphor.
Oh. It was, right? Our seat wasn't our seat. It was everyone else's seat, but we couldn't seat everyone else there. We didn't fit physically, so we were using DemocracyOS to bring all of this. So the net party was this Trojan horse. And so we went up to Congress. We parked this massive Trojan horse there. And we had this idea of dressing Greeks, and then someone didn't get the memo that we canceled that. And so we were all dressed up normally, and then one guy in a toga. It was
that was amazing. And then they called the police on you to clear out the
obstruction. It was a lot of fun. Yeah, the police were great. They were we had, I don't know, music playing on the background. It was great. It was party. It was festive. Yeah. It was what politics needs to be. And so we ran for elections, and it was painful because it's hard, because the system makes it really hard for you to participate, obviously. So we had to go to, I don't know, the electoral federal judge. There's only one in Argentina. She holds a lot of power, and she rules over political parties in the whole country. So we had to go to her and defend our right to use the word red or network on the party because someone had, told us. But anyway, everything is insane. You have to print your own ballots in color and really thick paper. So they're so expensive. So you need to fundraise for that. Anyway, it was fun. It was epic. And then but we didn't make it, which in hindsight, I think it was a good thing because, we wanted to be there, but also being in Congress, fighting this fight for 4 years, it's a tough ask. And, but I guess what I think I'm very proud of what we've achieved. We achieved a lot. I guess one of the things that I look back now and I'm most proud of is our ability to move the Overton window in a sense, right? To really push the boundaries of, it was so radical. It was so crazy that we put the bar so far away that everyone else who was attempting something a little bit more democratic and participatory was yes, please, you come here because these crazy guys over here are trying to do something that we can't really understand. And so we really moved the boundaries of what was perceived as doable, right? So far that I think we opened up maneuvering space. And I really like that strategy for systems change because you force the system to come to terms with what's possible. And even if you'll never make it, the moonshot opens up that space. And it's a space that others will then use. So as a strategy that kind of works. And then Congress started using the software, the platform, without the Net Party, which was great because the Net Party was a Trojan horse anyway. So we were all right, we'll ditch the party. That's fine. Off you go. And then you can use our platform, which is what we wanted to do initially, right? But we need to make all this mess for someone to look at us. And we did that for 5 years, I think, of traveling around the world, helping governments use DemocracyOS or other platforms, advocating for participatory democracy, really hammering on that around the world, globally. And then after several years of doing that, I guess that's when I came to terms with also, again, this idea that the system is just going to use what it needs from you. And this is not an ego thing. It wasn't us but what the system needs in order to self-perpetuate. And then it's going to keep doing what it's doing, right? Without devolving any real power, right? So they were oh my God, these kids are amazing. You take pictures, they use our software, they discuss 3 or 4 things, they put together a citizen assembly. And nothing really to
Let the kids play. Let the kids play with their tools and we will maintain power.
It's like Visconti, this movie, The Leopard, and the book. Something has to change for everything to remain the same, right? And that's what happened. And something changed and everything else remained the same. And so...
Interesting.
It was, I don't know, it was everything for me. I had all the feelings together. It was frustrating, but it was also quite empowering because we were suddenly talking to folks everywhere in the world about this and helping people in Sri Lanka and Pakistan think about participatory democracy. And we've inspired thousands of groups and activists. But at the same time, it felt defeating in a way. It felt what happened with this? And so maybe incremental change from within won't really cut it. Maybe the system is just going to stay there because it knows better. And so we need to maybe think about alternative systems. We need to think about alternative institutions. We need to think about really articulating a different way of doing things and experimenting,
So this is a well-known phenomena of the activists' burnout, where because you're trying to change a system that's so large and complex and has feedback, knows how to protect itself, progress is going to be super, super slow and never goes in a linear way. It's always ups and downs. And so people get really demotivated. But at the same time, Martin Luther King said, the long arc of history bends towards justice.
It's long, but it bends,
it's long, but it bends towards justice. Right. And I find, were you able to keep up the hope and motivation long term? And if so, how did you do it?
So definitely no. It was really hard. After a while of seeing all of these movements also die out. And the Arab Spring, Egypt, for me, was one of the kind of hardest things to see because I guess I realized that we were really undermining a system, right? By being out and camping and saying that everything was wrong and that it wasn't working for us, it's taking the streets, but we weren't really proposing anything concrete. For sure,
Right.
we had a lot of ideas.
You're not building anything,
We
just
weren't
destroying.
building anything, we were destroying. And so we created power vacuums. And if there's something about power and politics, is that it abhors vacuum and it's never going to remain empty. If you create a power vacuum, someone's going to step up as fast as they can, because that's how it works. And again, it's like this not understanding the nature of power. Power is conservative. Systems self-perpetuate. They'll change so they can remain the same. Power vacuums are never empty for very long. And the ones who fill them up are the ones who are already organized and radicalized, right? What we were discussing before. Because they're the ones who are ready to step up. And we were all like still discussing if liquid democracy should have transitive distribution or it should just... and when we turn around, like, organized actors had stepped in, they were in power, and they were, shutting everyone else off. And I was like, okay, what do we do now? Do we go home? Because this is not... So it was.
And it's an interesting game because in Egypt, you have the Muslim Brotherhood step in because they're more organized than the people. And then the army steps in because they're more organized than the Muslim Brotherhood. Exactly. And in the end, you end up with whoever is most organized.
That's exactly right. And who has the capacity to take that space, because that's how it works. And so we were again the ones used to create the power vacuum by undermining the systems that surely they didn't work, but they were better than the military, right? And I think that was like a very, frustrating moment for me, or not frustrating, but just deflating. It's like, why? And it's never linear, and it's never easy to stay motivated. And actually, I didn't. We created DemocracyOS after moving out of Buenos Aires, which is like a global project. We went really hard into crypto. We started experimenting there. And again, it felt like it was the right time to start thinking about crypto, and it was very momentous. But I was very tired of the democracy kind of activism work. And then I got pregnant in 2015. Yeah, 2015. And I wanted to step out of like democracy for a while. I wanted to, I was tired of that. But I was still thinking about systems, and I was still thinking about what to do next. And so a friend of mine, I was like 9 months pregnant. Thank you. What are you doing now? And I'm like, do you see what I'm seeing? Because I have a huge bump I'm carrying around. And it's, yes, of course, but after. And I'm like, raising the child, what do you think happens after you have one? I said, I know, but you want to come and work with me? We're doing this thing called Open Collective, and we're going to give communities economic power. And I'm like, that actually makes a lot of sense to me. We still need to build alternatives, right? And okay, so I'm not going to be working on building alternatives to our political system for a while, but I'm going to be working on giving economic power to communities and making sure that they have a path to be sustainable and to focus on their impact, right? So I guess I took on more of a kind of catalyzer role, which at the time suited me really well because of where I was, like in the point that I was in my life. And I've been, working on Open Collective, but also doing a lot of public speaking about the democracy work still until now,
Yeah. Cool. So I want to dive into that. But before we explain exactly what Open Collective is, I have a segue from the democracy stuff. I don't know if you read Gene Sharp's From Dictatorship to Democracy.
No, I haven't. But
it's
I was going to make a list of all the books that we're talking about. Yes, I don't want to forget.
It's going to be in the show notes. Yeah.
Okay, great.
But yeah, in terms of, From Dictatorship to Democracy, it's this political science book that almost like a guide for replacing autocracies with democracies. And actually his number one recommendation is create civil groups, organize civil groups of whatever. Like it could be a knitting club. It could be the more organized groups you have, the more power you have to change when the right time comes. And so by creating all of these open collectives, I know that a lot of the work right now is around like open source code, but these are, groups of people that work together and communicate.
Yeah.
And the more you have of these everywhere, the more likely we are to be able to make real change.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Tocqueville wrote about that in Democracy in America, right? Like the social fabric of the United States, the associations, right? What the associations can do. So, yeah, I've never made that link. Thank you. I just do things.
Nice.
So thank you for that. One of the things that was most challenging for me moving from Democracy Earth or DemocracyOS to Open Collective was like the narrative, right? How do I explain this to myself? How do I sell to the world, if you want, that I was like so involved in this and I'm like doing something else. I'm like not doing this anymore. It's and activists and like public people who have some like public persona, like it's a bit of a struggle, right? Because obviously you
want to maintain the brand.
You have your brand and you have the work you've done and people link you to that. And then there's a lot of explaining. And obviously I still am very passionate about everything I do. And so I come across as such, as like very passionate and involved. And so I had to build the narrative for myself. So when you said that, I'm like, that's a good piece of the narrative.
Yeah, that's what I do. I try to find the common threads.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, my transition had to do with, I think liquid democracy and new forms of governance need sandboxes. They need a place to practice. This is something that I learned a lot campaigning for the Net Party. They were like, another typical question is like, how are you going to trust? But what? Are we going to be able to decide? But how are we going to trust ourselves or each other? And I'm like, that's a really good question because we need to experience power, and decision-making, to understand how to do power and decision-making in a kind and just and so it is very difficult because you're in government. There is no dry run. You're there. I guess what I was trying to achieve with Open Collective was how do we create the organizations that are going to use these tools in the future? How are we going to create the communities that are going to practice with these tools? So we need to learn how to be responsible leaders of something, right? Because everything that we've heard was like from forever until now, you can't participate. You need to outsource your decision making. You are not prepared. You need to leave decision-making in the hands of experts, of professional citizens. You need to go into your private sphere and make money, but don't come into the public space because you're not fit for the public space. Come vote every couple of years. No, we're not interested in your opinion now. So obviously we've internalized this, right? There is like a very famous fable from Aesop called On Sour Grapes, and it's this little fox that tries to jump and catch the grapes that are on the tree and can't make it, and jumps and can't make it. And by the time it's big enough to jump and actually eat them, the fox convinced itself that the grapes are sour, that he will never catch them, even if he actually can. And we are the fox, right? We've internalized this notion that we can't participate and we're not able to engage and we're not able to decide, and we have fear. Like what I was seeing in people's eyes was like genuine concern about what do I have to decide? Do they have to decide? So we need like trial runs. We need dry runs for politics. We need sandboxes. We need to experience decision-making in order to learn how to decision make. And so I guess part of the community kind of emphasis of Open Collective was thinking about collectives as this space where we can use these tools, create new institutions, create new communities with a very specific focus of moving money from the center to the fringes.
Interesting. So Open Collective, I'll try to describe it and you can tell me where I'm wrong. So the ability of some new group of people, network of people that's collaborating on something that emerged from some crisis, that's collaborating on some project without strict hierarchies, without the traditional trappings of our current institutions. And they need to make things happen. So they need money, obviously, because this world is built on money. And I'm guessing that you're also providing some layer of governance and decision-making inside of this, and to empower them to operate like an institution without forcing them to become an institution, like a hierarchical and who's the CEO and who's the
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
tell me about Open Collective and how does it work? Like if I go and I'm especially interested because I think I understand the money piece. Yeah, you can raise money, ask for contributions, and then you get to use it as a community without needing a traditional structure.
That's exactly right.
Right, but how does governance work inside of this? How do decisions get made? Like even in a software level, is there an admin that makes decisions?
Yes,
like how does it work?
Yeah, so it's great. So we are famously opinionated in the money transparency management aspect of it. Like we're very opinionated. And we're famously agnostic when it comes to the type of governance that your group chooses. We have very basic levels of governance. It's modeled in the open source kind of world where you have core contributors that are the folks that have merging rights, right? So folks who can approve or reject expenses, or invoices, who can manage the basics of the collective page, who can invite other admins, etc. Those are the core contributors. And then you have the contributors, which is everyone else who's participating in the community. Those can be folks who attend an event, or financial contributors, or someone who is doing a design kind of thing for free for them, right? Those are all kind of the contributors. And there's this, and getting money out of the collective also works more or less like an open source project where someone submits a request for getting paid either for your time, when you build your time for working on the project, or you get an expense that you incurred during the activities of the community that you want to get reimbursed, paid back, or you request a grant, right, from the community. So you submit any of those three requests, and then the admins, the co-contributors approve or reject or ask for changes or discuss. The discussion doesn't happen in Open Collective. I don't think we need to be vertically integrated. I think we need to do one thing very well and then help others do. And then we can talk about how we are set up for that. And then once this is approved, the fiscal host, it goes to the second layer of governance, which is the folks that are core contributors to the kind of mother organization, which is the organization that receives the money for that collective and files taxes, takes care of legal, compliance, accounting, like everything that you should be doing as a community. There is a dedicated entity that does that for you, right?
Cool.
And then the core contributors to the entity execute on the compliance of that request and then make the payments. All of this sounds like a bit complicated, but it's like really simple. You submit a request, someone approves it, someone looks at the documentation, and we pay, fiscal hosts pay normally twice a week, right? So it's a really fast turnover. And Mondays and Thursdays.
That's crazy. I already have 2 organizations I'm involved with that I think would benefit from this.
Right?
And they're cool organizations, but they're being held back by the money.
We have a collective in Jerusalem. You're in Jerusalem, right? I didn't.
I'm near Tel Aviv. Yeah.
Okay, because it's at Jerusalem time on the invite. That's why I assumed you were there.
Israel is such a narrow country. It's all the same time. Yeah.
But we have a collective in Jerusalem they created a collective and a host because they want to support other kind of groups in that network. And so they're,
Interesting. Yeah. There's something there. I know you said you're not opinionated, but on the governance side, but it sounds to me like, okay, so in most organizations, there are core contributors and they're easy to identify. But I guess in some real broad movements, there could be a situation where you don't even know who the core contributors are. You just know. Yeah. And so, what do you do in a case like that?
So we tend to have like local chapters of broad movements, right? So we don't have a collective for, I don't know, Black Lives Matter or for DiEM25 or for Extinction Rebellion, right? We have hundreds of Extinction Rebellion groups that are local. So we have Extinction Rebellion Brussels, but also maybe like a local neighborhood in Brussels, right? So it's set up to be fractal in that sense, Open Collective. And so we support like really small minimal organizational entity. So that's how we cope with the larger kind of movements.
Interesting.
So most of Extinction Rebellion groups, chapters, are under one physical host that is called All for Climate, that is based out of Brussels. But we also have Extinction Rebellion in different hosts, right? In the US, in the UK, because it's more efficient to have them under different jurisdictions.
Yeah.
And so
I wonder if there's a way to federate them.
Yeah, I think what we want to do is eventually, our network of organizations around the world is quite large, and it supports a very large number of collectives. And so what we've tried, some of them we've created ourselves. So for example, for the open source ecosystem, we knew we wanted to have a dedicated umbrella organization, right? And it's the Open Source Collective, which is a nonprofit in California that we created. And we host currently 3,000 open source projects around the world. It has multi-million-dollar budget. And there is a lot of benefits in mutualizing resources, right? We have very minimal staff. We have one legal counsel. We have one accounting team. And if not, each of those collectives should have to figure out how to do this by themselves, right?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of scale there. And from there, we want to also have networks of hosts and then networks of collectives. And we're now working a lot with our foundation, the Open Collective Foundation, which is our charity, in the solidarity economy space. So we grew a lot, obviously, last year in the solidarity economy space. And we are thinking in the network of net scale and level at the moment. And it's challenging for us because we grew very fast. But the possibilities are endless because of two decisions. We're fractal. One collective is a collective and it doesn't really matter. And you can have different mini collectives underneath, or a host is also a collective, right? So it's the same entity that operates across all different levels of the stack. And so that makes it really easy to federate, to bring together, to create, and also to disband networks, right? The cost of adding one collective is zero. And then the other decision that we made that has to do with that is we think of open collectives and we're building open collective as a Rails kind of approach. We don't want to be a platform. We don't want to bring another platform into the world. Yes, we are a platform, but we are building open collective to have. So obviously it's open source, but also it has a public API. And this year is about growing the API. So if you have a really cool governance tool or app or whatever that you want to connect with Open Collective, you can just go ahead and do it, right? If your collective has a DAO and you want decisions to be made at the DAO level and then executed at the fiat level and Open Collective, you can do that, things like that, right? So we are building ourselves in a way that we are plumbing, and then everything else at the governance level gets built on top of us.
Interesting. You could connect something like holacracy module or
because I don't want to decide, right?
Yeah.
I don't think that governance arrangements vary depending on the type of community, and communities
but it would be
need
nice to see all of these options as you sign up. It would be hey, here's a marketplace for governance. Choose one. It's my designer mind already designing.
We'll definitely get there. We were just talking with the MetaGov. I don't know if you talked to them in Stanford, MetaGov team. And they're building things like that. So we're thinking about how to have a community data standard, right? Where all community data is standardized in the same way, so it can be portable to any other application. And so you can port your Open Collective kind of transition history and things like that to your application. And we have our work.
There's a lot of work there. It's exciting. I have a feeling that people who listen to this tend to be on the entrepreneurial/designer side. And I know a lot of them are, because I spoke to them, are yearning for more impact and are super interested in these kinds of problems. But it's not easy to find a way to get involved. So I wonder, maybe before we continue and finish the journey, do you have a tip for people who want to get involved specifically in this new way to organize ourselves and society and our organizations and democracy and all that stuff?
I don't know. Do it.
Just do it.
Yes, just do it.
Nice.
Gosh, they really got that one right. So it's a good phrase and it's been taken. But part of what we try to do with Open Collective by removing the abstracting out the friction of engaging is exactly that, right? If you, so say you want to start something or you want to join something, and then you have to be a board member, and then you have to go to the bank and sign or co-sign, or you need to put your name there, or you're liable for that. It's just not going to happen. It's just, it's honestly not going to happen. And who can blame you, right? But if joining a community is as easy as becoming a core contributor, and then you can stop being a core contributor. And this for me was like a really important aspect, because my transition from the Net Party to Open Collective was, as I said, like a bit of a struggle, because I carried a lot. But then maybe we want to become something, and then you get pregnant and you don't want to do that anymore. And it should be easy to transition out of things, because we should be able to be open collectives, right?
It should be more flexible. Yeah, it makes me think of meetup.com. Meetup.com lets you step down as the organizer. And then it holds a little election, I think. Interesting. Yeah, if I do get pregnant, I will definitely want that option. It's good to be ready for anything.
Exactly. I know, in this world.
Yeah. So what makes you, this is a dual question. What makes you depressed about the world?
Okay.
And then I'll ask what makes you hopeful, inspires you.
I guess the snail speed of change makes me depressed. The long arc is so long that it's depressing how long it is. And it's always 2 steps forwards, 1 step backwards. And it's just, it's depressing that we are still where we are. You know, when I don't know, Trump depressed me, a lot.
Oh, yeah.
It was so hard. 2006 was such a, 2016 was such a difficult year for me. It took me...
The last 4 years were...
Oh, gosh. It took me a long time to get out of under my bed. That one, it was tough, especially for women. And I was living in the United States at the time. It was just very awful. So
I left right before the election, right before 2016 election. So that was it's kind of horror from afar. But then every time I came back, I got to see my depressed friends. One thing that helped me as this was happening was to step out of the moment that I was in and assume a more universal perspective, and realizing that most progress happened from a place of chaos and dysfunction. That it's almost like order and chaos are 2 sides of the same process. And you have to have these big breaks, and then something shifts, and then that's where things happen. And if you look at it from 200 years in the future, it was the necessary catalyst.
Yeah.
Maybe is a very good...
I hope so.
No, I think it's a good place to leave that. And then what makes you hopeful or inspires you?
I guess, look, last year, what inspired me were like all of the mutual aid groups that I was seeing popping up on Open Collective, and all the people coming together and supporting each other. It was, I don't know, it was fuel for me, because it's inspiring. And I read the stories and I devour their updates. So give me more of this. I want to learn. But yes, so that makes me very hopeful that we can do that for one another.
Is there a specific story or a specific group that kind of captured your imagination?
I think it was just the collective power of all of these different people stepping out of their comfort zones and taking care of each other, where, our governments were just utterly unable to. And so it made me really hopeful that we're builders. We're able to come up with these new institutions. We are that generation. We're a generation that it's our role to rethink and redesign the type of political systems and institutions that we have. And it's our place in history, and no one's going to do it if we're not up to it. And I guess seeing all of these movements and communities coming together and having economic power and organizing just makes me hopeful that we're able to move beyond being crisis responders into something else. Because the beauty of networks is once you've created that network, the network is there. And when the crisis passes through, a lot of networks are going to break apart, but a lot of them are going to reinvent themselves as something else, right?
Yeah.
When you create kind of social fabric, the fabric remains, right? One of the most interesting projects I heard of in the past couple of years was this group that was trying to raise something about like $1 billion or something like that to use in a participatory budgeting experience with 300 million young people around the world. The sheer scale of that is just amazing. I was like, I want to do, where do I sign? That scale is like, but also what was so interesting to me is, oh my God, you're going to be creating a network of 300 million people who are going to, young people, who are going to be deciding something together. It doesn't matter what they decide. That's not the point. The $1 billion is anecdotal. What matters is like the network you create. And so what the past year or this pandemic is going to leave us with is like renewed social tissue. And God, we needed that, right? We needed social fabric to be put back together and sewn back together because the world was giving up at the seams. And all of that is going to remain after the pandemic. And that makes me super hopeful.
Yeah. It's funny because we started the conversation with the Arab Spring and what was happening in Egypt and our ability to destroy, but we can't really put something back together. And here you are in a company that allows people to build and put things back together.
Yeah.
And build new things together, not just destroy, which is the hopeful side of this.
I'm going to write about that. I think that's a really good point.
Nice. So I have a final question that I like to end with. And it's this. In his TED Talk, the philosopher Alain de Botton talked about the difference between a lecture and a sermon. And he says a lecture is the kind of secular, modern way of conveying information, and it's just there to give you a little bit of information, and it's up to you what to do with it. Whereas a sermon is urgently trying to change your life. And his point was we need more sermons in our lives. And so I want to give you the stage to give a short sermon to people who are eager to make a difference, who are interested in these problems, and maybe aren't doing much about it, maybe have a day job, anything that you can tell them that could change your life.
No pressure. I guess I would tell them, don't be a fox. Don't accept that the reality that we have is the only thing there is, right? We can't change existing reality. We can fight it, but we can also build alternative systems and alternative realities that render the existing one old and obsolete. And so don't accept what we have as a given. The United States weren't always here. The nation state wasn't always here. Borders weren't always here. Things come and go. And so it's up to us to decide the type of world we want to live in. Don't accept that the grapes are sour, because maybe they're not. And if we don't do it, no one else is going to do it. So it's really up to us.
Thanks, Pia.
Thank you.
All right, that's it for today. If you enjoyed the podcast and would like to support it, please consider writing a 5-star review in Apple's podcast app or wherever you're listening. It helps many more people discover the podcast and also makes us feel good. Current support for the podcast comes from my own design company, Remake Labs. We run design sprints all over the world, and our goal is to improve outcomes, whether in business or various organizations, through repeated and rapid design interventions. Now, until next time, be well, everyone. See you next week on Remake.